Soon after they began the fight, the heathen were slain and put to flight, and 30 chief men and leaders who had come to the king's aid were almost all slain. Among these was Aethelhere, king of the East Angles. He was slain, and all the troops he brought with him. And because the river Ire, near which the battle was fought, was very furious, owing to abundant rains and heavy floods filled it so happened that in their flight a much larger number were drowned in the water than were slain with the sword. Then King Oswiu did as he had promised the Lord, and gave thanks to God for the victory vouchsafed him. Welcome to Enthusiastical History. You are listening to our 4th episode. In this episode, we are going to see Northumbria at its height, and then witness its downfall, while other kingdoms in the south rise to power. We finished our last episode with the battle between Mercians and Northumbrians, and in that battle Oswiu was victorious. Now, with Penda slain and his coalition shattered, there was no one left to contain Oswiu, now the strongest man in all Britain. He will take advantage of the situation immediately and expand in all directions. Oswiu's first action after the battle was installing Penda's son and his son-in-law, Peada, as king of South Mercia. As you'll remember, Peada married Oswiu's daughter in our last episode. So Oswiu installed him as the new king of Mercia, though only the southern parts. Oswiu himself would now rule the northern parts of Mercia. The next spring, however, Peada would be murdered, and according to Bede, by his own wife. So Oswiu's daughter was involved in his murder, probably. Following the assassination, instead of appointing a new puppet, Oswiu decided to rule the whole of Mercia himself, which might indicate his involvement in the act, considering his daughter is said to have been behind the plot. Around this time, Welsh annals record that Oswiu came and took booty. No details are given, but it doesn't take much thinking to guess that it was against King Cadafel of Givernet, the old ally of Penda. After taking control of Mercia and raiding the Britons of Givernet, Oswiu turned his gate north. He campaigned against the Picts and subdued them. For 3 whole years, Oswiu was the unquestionable dominant power in Britain. This would change with a coup in Mercia. Some Mercian earls rebelled against Oswiu's agents in the country and installed another son of Penda, Wulfhere, as their new king. This coup might have happened while Oswiu was fighting the Picts in the north. Indeed, if that was the case, it's a good explanation as to why Oswiu did not try and regain control of Mercia. Now, with an independent Mercia to its south, Oswiu's imperium south of Humber was much weaker. Sigebert the Good, king of the Saxons, who was an ally of Oswiu, was murdered sometime after the ascension of Wulfhere, which is again a good indicator of the weakened influence of Oswiu. Nonetheless, he remained an important figure, just a lesser one. During the 660s, his eldest son, Alfred, who had been ruling as king of Deira under Oswiu, started acting rebellious towards his father. Now, it's a long story, which we'll save for a bonus episode, but to put it briefly, it was about a disagreement concerning the differences of Roman Catholic and Celtic traditions of Christianity. Alfred tried to use this to acquire more autonomy, but failed to do so. Bede says he attacked his father, after which our guy vanishes from history, so he was probably killed. After his eldest son's death, Oswiu installed Ecgfrith as the new sub-king of Deira. And 6 years after this, Oswiu died, and his son Ecgfrith replaced him as king of Bernicia, and installed his younger brother as king of Deira. Ecgfrith's reign would see the height of Northumbrian power, and then the fall. Before his story, though, let's turn to Mercia. Unlike his father, the new king of Mercia, Wulfhere, was a Christian. We don't know when or why he converted, but after his ascension in 658, he ruled as a Christian king, appointing successive bishops and establishing ties with other Christian rulers of the area. One such ruler was King Eronkenbert of Kent. Wulfhere married his daughter, probably hoping to establish closer relations with the Anglo-Frankish court of Kent, and thus with the Franks of the continent. Previously, we've talked about why the Franks and maintaining good relations with them were important, but if you want to refresh your memory or if you haven't listened to it, I would highly recommend you to listen to our bonus episode 2.2. Wulfhere's reign saw the restoration of Mercian power in all directions. To the north, Wulfhere attempted to take Lindsey out of Northumbrian sway, an effort in which he saw success over time. Though we aren't sure when, but by 672 he was certainly in control of Lindsey. In the south, things were more chaotic. It was a time of change. So far, we have been busy exploring the struggles in the central and northern parts of the Anglo-Saxon world, for this is where the big guys were. Don't let that fool you though, the south was no less troublesome. There was a great struggle for power between the Saxons of the Thames Valley, and the late 7th century saw the collapse of the political system in the south. When that happened, Wulfhere was there to take advantage of it. Remember Sigebert the Good, the king of East Saxons, whose murder I just mentioned? Well, after his death, Swithelm took the throne of Essex. During the second year of his reign, he was convinced to get baptized by the East Anglians. 2 years later, he died and left the throne to two of his cousins, who, once again, turned back to the worship of the old gods. They too were converted under pressure. This time, however, it wasn't the East Anglians who convinced them, but rather Wulfhere's Mercia. Wulfhere's increasing influence over the East Saxons gained him considerable power, so much so that in 665 he was in a position to sell the bishopric of London, which shows that he was practically in control of the city. And this was the most important accomplishment of Wulfhere, or any Mercian king for that matter. Not because it was won by an impressive feat of arms, or a bloody battle, or a giant conspiracy, but because London was exactly what Mercia lacked, what Mercia needed the most. If Mercia was Sauron, then London was the One Ring. You see, up until now, all the Bretwalders had one thing in common: access to sea. Both the kings of Kent and East Anglia had access to the sea and thus had an easy time establishing connections with the Franks, while the Northumbrian kings had access to the Irish Sea and thus the rich culture and many kingdoms of that area. Until now, Mercian kings had no such advantage, and that was the biggest problem they faced in their struggle to rise to the top. London was the answer to this problem. Though the London Wulfhere took control of wasn't the London of today, nor was it the London of the Roman days. It was something different. Following the arrival of the first Anglo-Saxon settlers into Britain, many aspects of the daily life in Britain changed. One of those was the nature of settlements. The Anglo-Saxons didn't inhabit the walled Roman cities, whose old dwellers, the Britons and the Romans, left. There were many reasons behind that. The Anglo-Saxons had neither the technology nor the manpower to support such large settlements, so as the cities of the old Roman days crumbled and turned into ruins, new settlements arose from the ashes of the old. These new inhabitants preferred to settle near coasts, where they could easily shelter their ships. Some of these settlements remained small, while others grew into cities over time. One such city was London, or rather Londonwick. To the west of the walled Roman city, London, grew the new city of Londonwick. It became a center of trade, in the words of Bede, a mart for many nations coming by sea and land. And acquiring control of Lundovik meant that now the Mercians had everything they needed for reigning supreme. The situation would get even better for Wulfhere following the death of Egbert, king of Kent. Wulfhere expanded his influence deeper into the Thames Valley, seizing control of the province of Surrey and putting more pressure onto the Saxons of the Thames Valley. Around this time, Wulfhere campaigned into West Saxon territory, harried Ashdown, and captured the Isle of Wight, then gifted it to his ally, or rather sub-king, king of East Saxons. It was looking great for Wulfhere and his Mercians. He was near greatness, but there was one more problem he needed to deal with: Northumbria. Ecgfrith of Northumbria wasn't staying still while Wulfhere strengthened his position. He too had been dealing with his problems. In the year 671, Ecgfrith put down a rebellion of Picts and consolidated his position in the north. 3 years after that, he finally assembled an army and marched south to challenge Wulfhere's position in Lindsey. The two sides fought and Ecgfrith came out victorious. Wulfhere survived the battle, but his position was significantly weakened. In 675, one of the West Saxon kings challenged Wulfhere and fought a battle against him. Although the outcome isn't recorded, considering what happened later, it would be safe to say it didn't go Wulfhere's way. He died prematurely the same year, possibly from wounds inflicted in the battle, and was succeeded by his brother, Ethelred. These two losses were a major setback for Mercia, and thus Ethelred would inherit a troublesome position. In the first years of his reign, Ethelred tried to secure Mercian control over southern Britain, or whatever was left of it. West Saxons were out of Mercian sphere of influence for good, and soon they would rise to significance. Lindsey too was gone, now under Northumbrian control. Ethelred, in the second year of his reign, possibly trying to strengthen his hold on Surrey, attacked Kent and devastated its lands, ransacking Rochester during the course of his attack. 3 years later, around 679, he fought against Ecgfrith for Lindsey. The result was a stalemate, but during the course of battle, Ecgfrith's brother was slain, and after the intercession of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lindsey was ceded to Mercia. Although he lost Lindsey and a brother, Ecgfrith was still strong. In 684, he sent out a raiding warband to Ireland under a general of his, and they returned with many slaves and treasures. A year later, the mighty king would have to march north to suppress another Pictish rebellion. This time, though, things wouldn't go as expected. Ecgfrith was lured into unfavorable terrain with a feigned retreat and slaughtered there, along with his army. This defeat was a huge disaster for Northumbria, and although the kingdom stayed relatively strong, they would never fully recover from it. With both Northumbria and Mercia weakened, there appeared a power vacuum, and as is always the case, power vacuums create new powers. In this case, it was Wessex. Up until now, we haven't mentioned the West Saxons much. That's because the name West Saxons or Wessex is a grouping done by us to make things easier to understand. We don't know much about them, but from what we know, we can tell that the West Saxons weren't a unified group. They were consisting of many tribes, just like the other kingdoms, and perhaps even more than the others. More centralized groups like the East Anglians, Northumbrians, or the Jews of Kent. That situation, however, wasn't to last forever. They needed a strong man to make a change, and they got what they needed, just at the right time. Cadwalla first appears in the historical record as an exiled prince wandering in the forests of Chiltern and Undred with a warband under his command. He is then recorded attacking the southern Saxons. He manages to defeat and slay their king, but then gets pushed out by two ealdormen, who afterwards start to rule Sussex. The next year, in 686, Cadwalla establishes himself as the king of the West Saxons. Again, it's probable that he wasn't king of all West Saxons, as there are several other kings of the West Saxons recorded during the same year, but doubtless he was the strongest of them. After becoming king, Cadwalla attacked the southern Saxons once again and subjugated Sussex. He then went on to attack the Jutes of Kent and Isle of Wight. He established his brother, Mull, as king of Kent and gave the control of Isle of Wight to men loyal to him. Mull wasn't accepted by the locals though, and for good reason. You see, Kent had been the strongest kingdom in the south since the arrival of Hengest and Horsa, and her proud people weren't about to accept a foreign puppet king, so they rebelled and burnt Mull to death. Cadwalla didn't take kindly to this incident and responded with a new invasion next year, and that invasion too was successful, after which he ruled Kent directly for a while. In 688, the young king unexpectedly abdicated with the intention of getting baptized in Rome. He went to Rome, got baptized, and died within 10 days of his baptism, which might explain why he felt the need to leave when he was in his prime. He was probably ill, and thus wanted to secure for himself a good place in the Christian heaven. Cadwalla's sudden rise to power and even more sudden departure would again change the balances in the region. Ine ascended to the throne of Wessex, but he failed to maintain the sway Cadwalla established over the neighboring kingdoms. In Kent, Oswin became king with the support of Mercius. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have a strong position. Kent at this point was severely weakened and had become a playground of bigger powers. Oswin seems to have ruled together with a prince of the East Saxons, namely Sverhard. Essex was under the influence of Mercia; nonetheless, they also tried to assert control over Kent and thus gain power for themselves. Evidence suggests that Oswin was unable to rule effectively, partly because of the foreign interventions, but also because he didn't have much support from his own countrymen. In either 691 or 692, a Kentish prince named Withred became king in Kent. In his first 2 years, he ruled together with Swerfhard. There's almost no doubt that Oswin was just a puppet of Mercians, and it's probably because of this that he didn't have any support from inside. And considering the man who replaced him, Withred, was supported by his own countrymen, we could say that he wasn't a simple puppet, as Oswin was. After his ascension, him ruling together with the Saxon prince shows that he was either supported by the East Saxons or at least accepted by them. In any case, by 694, Withred was ruling alone in Kent, and he was a much more successful ruler than his predecessors. First, he asserted control over his own kingdom by getting rid of his co-ruler, and then he strengthened his position further by paying the West Saxons Vergeld for the deceased Mal, brother of Cadwalla, and thus securing peace between the two kingdoms. With some stability finally established in the region, a period of peace started. During the last years of the 7th century, both Withred and Ine issued law codes in their respective kingdoms. There is evidence that suggests there was at least some degree of cooperation between the kings for the writing of law codes. During this period of peace, kings of Anglo-Saxons worked to consolidate their realms rather than seeking adventures. The West Saxons and Jutes of Kent were busy writing law codes, while the Mercians were increasing their control over Hivike, a tribe which was somewhat autonomous until that point but would be fully integrated into the Mercian kingdom by 720s. In the north, the Northumbrians were licking their wounds, so there was peace throughout the Anglo-Saxon world, save for some strife with the church, which we'll talk about in our next bonus episode. The peace that lasted for a quarter of a century would be broken by the Mercians, though not under Ethelred. King Ethelred abdicated in 704 to become a monk and left the throne to his nephew, Conrad. After ruling in peace for 5 years, Conrad followed his uncle's example and abdicated to become a monk in Rome. Thus, Ceolred was crowned King of Mercians. We don't know much about Ceolred, but from what we know, we can tell that he wasn't liked by the church. He is accused of crimes and sinful acts by the clergy, but those are minor details. The most important event of his reign was his attack on the West Saxons in the year 716. He fought against King Ine in the Warden's Barrow overlooking the Vale of Pavesey, and the outcome isn't known, but Ceolred was probably victorious. And it is with the Battle of Warden's Barrow the age of Mercian supremacy will begin. That's all for today's episode. In our next episode, we're going to witness the era of Mercian supremacy. Until then, take care, and thank you for listening.